Yeah, good evening once again. Sorry, Esther has an issue with her machine. She's sorting it out. As she sorts it out, I would like to welcome today's speaker, Mr. James Odongo, who will be taking us through the session. Karibu sana, Bwana James.
All right. Thank you very much, Jay. I appreciate it. I think I'll just dive right into the presentation. She was to guide on the format of the session, but I'll now take on the privilege of being the pilot of the ship. So yeah, as you rightly put it, my name is James Odongo. I currently work at an organization called the Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization. So for those who may not necessarily be familiar with the organization, we are essentially an entity that is trying to accelerate Kenya's realization of a circular economy through, of course, implementation of a number of initiatives, but more predominantly extended producer responsibility, which from a layman's point of view would then have obligated brands. So for instance, the Pepsis, the Nestle, really your common household brands are now required legally to take care of the environmental consequences of their product. And so this would mean that Pepsi then pays off, or rather transfers this obligation to a special purpose vehicle such as KPRO to then undertake these obligations on their behalf. We've been doing this since 2021. I joined the organization in 2023, so almost marking my third year in the organization. So just for me to be able to now set context for today's conversation, Esther approached me, just as a disclaimer, I'm currently on leave, which also meant that it was the most suitable moment for us to have this discussion. And she gave me a very complex and a fairly complex on how to climb the corporate ladder. And in this case, she was keen on me sharing my personal experience and the journey that I've taken to where I am at. I wouldn't say I'm at my optimal position in terms of career growth, but I think I've gained substantive experience that I'm happy to share with everyone joining this call today. So the brief was how to climb the corporate ladder, and she was gracious enough to allow me to share my personal journey. But before that, maybe I can speak onto my profile. As I mentioned, I'm currently serving as a CEO of the Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization, that is KPRO. In terms of my academic background, might sound fairly off, but yeah, I have a bachelor's in urban and regional planning from the University of Nairobi. I'm also a master's holder in urban management, still from the University of Nairobi. I have a postgraduate diploma in extended producer responsibility from Copenhagen University in Denmark. In terms of my professional affiliation, being an urban planner, I naturally pivoted to the Architectural Association of Kenya. Of course, this is within the town planning chapter, recognizing that the AK is fairly large in terms of its representation. In terms of my areas of focus and interests from a career perspective, more recently, I've been more into circular economy, building on to the experiences I've gained over the years in matters green building, project management, policy and advocacy, as well as stakeholder management, really among others. Last year, I was honored to be recognized among the Kenya Top 40 Under 40 by the program by Business Daily Africa. So that is just a very brief overview of my profile. I'm happy to also connect with you on LinkedIn by scanning onto the QR code that is on your screen. Now, before I delved onto my presentation on what would then be the tenements for climbing the career ladder, I'd want to start with a brief story. And the story goes like, really not a story per se, but a contextual narrative. where, and this is something that we experience on a day-to-day basis. You get into a building, a tall one for that matter, and you have two options: either take the elevator or take the stairs. More often than not, we will always, and for understandable reasons, we'll always choose the easy option, which would be to take the lift or the elevator of the building. And in this case, it's fairly easy. You press a button, or someone presses a button in a pre-programmed arrangement, and you find yourself in the uppermost floor, depending on the location you're going to. But then the other option is the ladder. The ladder is fairly, and in this case, uh, would be arguably exhaustive to use. It has its own fair share of challenges, if I would put it that way. And so very few people would always be willing to take on that challenge. But that is where now, this is where, or rather, this is what forms the basis of my presentation. While it may look harder, the ladder, whenever you're taking the steps, or rather the staircase for this matter, will always require some level of balance and persistence. If you fail to concentrate, then you might go off balance and unfortunately trip and fall. It is fairly slow and sometimes can also be uncomfortable. You get to the fourth floor and you're panting, and you of course also have to hold on tight to the guardrails. But then there is a secret that more often we'd want to ignore. But the staircase gives you the opportunity to then control your own pace. Unlike a lift, there are lifts that will go, abstractly saying, 1 floor per second. There are lifts that will say one floor per 5 seconds or something. But on the other hand, you're the one to decide which pace you're going to take, whether you're going to run up the stairs, whether you're going to walk. Really, it's up to you to choose. Then it also helps you build your resilience. I mean, you get to the second floor and you're like, okay, am I really going to make it to the 8th floor? That is you building that resilience. And when you reach at the top, there is that feeling of you having conquered something that might have then seemed insurmountable at the beginning. So bringing closer home to my presentation for the day, then when you're talking about climbing the career ladder, it's really replicable to the staircase narrative, where we say, unlike the elevator where there are quick promotions and favors or titles, the ladder requires a step-by-step approach that then would require you to gain skills, ground yourselves in the different networks that you'd have established over the years, and of course, the bit about the resilience. So, based upon the brief that then Esther shared, I tried to look at my personal journey and I asked myself, what are some of the tenements that have helped me move on to where I am today? And the first is that ability to be able to see the bigger picture. So, of course, the corner office requires that you're more of a strategic leader than a technical expert. And so, more often than not, then whether it's your mentors, your business leaders, your board of directors, looking at potentially promoting you into that corner office, will then look at your ability to be able to articulate your vision for the industry in the long term, whether it is within the 5 years or the 10 years or within a year, and really also seeing how you can be able to move, because for instance, in a typical business member organization, you're looking at the board being the vision bearers. So they want to see then how you're able to move these visionary ideas into more practical steps that then the team can be able to rally behind. So translating vision into clear and actionable strategies would be a must to have. And of course, the bit about anticipation. I think, and at least this is me speaking based off on my experience the last 5 years or so, is that anticipating the different market trends and disruptions would also sort of put you in a very unique position to be considered for leadership positions in different jurisdictions. I'll use a very recent example. At KEPRO, while we are more of an industry-led private sector entity, there was an envisionment that then there would be a legal provision to support implementation of extended producer responsibility in Kenya. And so this was contained in the Sustainable Waste Management Act back in 2022. And if you're aware of the policy landscape in Kenya, then ordinarily you have an act, and then the regulations will then speak to the verbatim of the act. So Section 13 of the act says all products being introduced into the Kenyan market would require institution of EPR mechanisms. And that is just that one simple statement that is then translated into a sub policy document or regulations in this case. So in anticipation, you will develop your strategic plans, your vision statement and the like, with the hope that then the regulations would have been gazetted by end of last year. First, I joined the organization on the assumption that the regulations would have been gazetted within the 6 months that I was hired. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Almost 3 years later, we had the regulations being gazetted, but unfortunately, someone had to go to court, and that is now in jeopardy in terms of really us having an understanding of when the EPR regulations will then kick off in terms of implementation. So that directly then impacts on our business model, because remember, the law then compels producers to contribute funds to us. So if we are not then able, or myself as a CEO, I'm not able to anticipate what will be the market trends in the absence of the EPR regulations, for instance, then that also potentially pours cold water on my strategic abilities to run the organization. So quickly, then that would mean I have to be very, while remaining optimistic, I have to be cautious around the spending organization. That is one such response in anticipation of the market trends. I would also have to be very reserved around the hiring processes. So, of course, in this case, you're forced to maybe adopt a leaner team compared to what would be the ideal team size of the team. So those are some of the practical steps that demonstrate that capability to be strategic and visionary in your leadership style. And these you should be able to start grounding yourself in, even at your very low level career stage, because it then helps you anticipate. And we usually say the success of any leader, if you look at it from some of the biggest, greatest world leaders, business leaders, the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musk, you notice that that bit of being able to look into the vision, remain aligned to the goals of the organization, but also be alive to the reality that the market trends could either shape or sink the organization, have really set them apart and seen them do the massive things that they've been able to do over the years. The second thing would be on stakeholder management and influence. This, I think, is fairly unique for me because I mean, my career has fairly been in business member organizations in the last 8 years. Of course, before that, I was also working with a lot of stakeholders. But more importantly, is that how you're able to leverage the stakeholders that you have connections with to drive influence is also very critical. And this would be in the context of your relationship with the board, the rest of the team members. If it is in an abstract or a typical business, then how are you relating with the investors? If it is a regulator, at KEPRO, for instance, the National Environment Management Authority is our regulator. My relationship with them would also extend to how then they relate or impose certain regulations on our members. The relationship between ourselves and media is also largely influenced by the CEO and of course, myself as a person. And so that is also very big in terms of you climbing up the corporate ladder. Start developing these critical networks with the relevant stakeholder, but then go a step higher and ensure that then the relationships would help you influence certain narratives. Being inspirational amongst peers, subordinates, and external partners is also one way to be able to ensure that you're able to influence these stakeholders to move towards the direction that you'd be deeming fit for you based off on your career projections, or really even on your day-to-day management undertakings. As I've also mentioned, and almost belaboring the point, building on networks and ensuring that you have very strong relationship building skills would also give you an upper hand compared to others. And the best way to then ask yourself, in your position right now, are you able to influence outcomes without necessarily having any formal authority? That is usually my go-to question whenever I'm in a space that I feel I then need to come in as a manager or a leader. Yeah. The other thing is on emotional intelligence. This is fairly big. I wouldn't say that it is the easiest to grasp, and almost being vulnerable is that every so often, you'd always find yourself in a trajectory that would potentially be construed to you not mastering emotional intelligence. And here we are talking about you being able to be self-aware and self-regulate under pressure. I won't lie to you, it's not something to be, it's not really a linear undertaking. More often than not, you will assume that you've grasped it. A few days later on, looking back is when you're like, okay, did I really handle the situation as somebody with some fairly good EQ as a leader? And so when you're talking about EQ, there would also be the need for you to be empathetic, especially when you're leading diverse teams. And in such an ecosystem where we are now starting to also deal with fairly young employees that are not only knowledgeable around their rights as employees, but are also very cognizant of the global trends around the workplace ethics, workplace requirements, and the likes. It then requires you to be not only empathetic, but also find a way to find balance between firmness and compassion. I'll tell you, for instance, we have, and I'll be biased towards referencing Kepro because I was given the liberty to share my own personal journey. At Kepro, we have allowed for work from home on Thursdays. While I don't want to assume then that I need to look at people, have you logged onto your system at 8 a.m.? Are you on until 5 p.m.? The reality of the matter is that that will never be the case. And this is why we, as a traditional leader, you'd be tempted to then be very strict around 8 to 5. But the day then that they will be required to extend beyond 5 p.m. is when more often than not, then it comes back to bite you. So you have to find that balance and allow for that flexibility that, okay, it's a work from home. Have you met all your deliverables? Then really, as long as you're available, nobody's going to be policing you and looking at your teams to confirm that you're online from 8 to 5. The other thing would be on the political acumen to navigate office dynamics without being consumed by them. And I'm hoping that there are few leaders in the room. But one thing you'll notice that the higher you go, the more scrutiny you'll always be exposed to. You will make decision Y. There will always be quotas, either resisting or questioning that decision. You'll make decision X. There will always be those voices that either oppose or reject or really want to fight the trajectory that you'd want to take as a leader. That then requires some bit of political acumen, not the one-term type. It's the EQ type where you're then asking yourself, uh, 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 because really, remember, every other leader would, in one way or another, be dealing with imposter syndrome. And so, if you allow yourself then to be drowned by these external voices without any level of political acumen, then I think you're grounding yourself, or rather setting up yourself for failure in terms of your leadership style. So be very intentional about balancing them, assuming it's conflicts. How are you handling them? Are you listening to both sides of the divide, or are you also allowing for objectivity in terms of solving such conflicts? So really be open to non-biased behaviors in terms of management, and also be open to criticism, so that there is two-way feedback loop. In terms of the execution discipline, really this goes to personal values, and I'm sure anyone in the career space will always point to that reality that there is usually that one team member who everyone will avoid if something has to go through them and it has a deadline. So don't be this one person who everyone knows then that, hey, if I give James this, it won't work. I'd rather go to Jay, or I'd rather go to Esther. Really just ground yourself in being that executioner, be that one person who gets things done. It will always set you apart from the busybodies in the room. You also need to then ask yourself, are you able to balance the quick wins with the long-term transformation? So as a leader, you are the custodian of the visionary, or the vision of the organization, as shared with you before. So as a strategic document holder then, or vision holder for that matter, you must then not be caught up in the day-to-day activities and forget how they feed onto the strategic objectives. I usually refer to the business as usual undertaking. These are the day-to-day activities that you do. So the business as usual would be me meeting a governor, would be me responding to emails. But you see, if I'm constantly responding to emails or meeting these other people, but they're not feeding into the general objective or the long-term strategic objective of the organization, that there is always so much I'm achieving. So I always have to find a balance and then ask myself, if I'm getting into this meeting, what is the long-term effect in terms of implementation of the strategic objectives of the organization? If it is then not really within my purview in terms of influencing the long-term transformation, I'm either open to rejecting that invitation for the meeting, or then delegating it to a peer, and allowing me then to focus on the long-term strategic objectives. On the other bit, when you're talking about execution discipline, you must also have the courage to be that one person who will always be making the difficult decisions. And this is tied to the initial statement about political acumen. More often than not, you'll be the one responsible for advising the board on certain fronts. This would ordinarily not make you so popular, either within your staff quarters or within the board quarters. Almost referring to that famous quote that it gets lonely on the top. That is a fairly true perspective, at least from a personal experience, that when you get to a certain level, then you must be this one person who will be the one to make the difficult decisions. If it means letting go of someone that you tried handholding, and they're not in any way improving, the buck falls with the CEO to then ensure that we are letting go of this person, of course, objectively and as required in terms of human resource policies for the organization. The other thing is mastering the art of storytelling. And I think this is almost me belaboring the point. this is information that is almost all out there in terms of really just leveraging the art of communication, where we are saying be clear, confident, and inspirational in terms of how you engage with people, both internally and of course externally. The other bit is, of course, being able to communicate with impact across the different cultures and contexts that you'll be engaging with. So, for instance, as an organization, we work with both ends of the spectrum. In the morning, you'll be meeting the CEO of, say, Bidco. In the afternoon, you're in Dandora meeting the West speakers. So this then requires that you have to find a balance so that when you're speaking to the Mancha in the morning, you are cognizant of the fact that in the afternoon, you'll have to potentially change your outfit. You'll have to potentially change how you communicate, potentially now consider speaking Swahili or Sheng, just to be able to relate with that audience. So that is also very big. The other bit is on listening. I think as a leader, you need to listen a lot more. This will always set you apart from the rest of the team, because if you're able to listen, then you're also able to gather insights that others may miss. And of course, this then differentiates you in terms of strategic decision making and influencing. The other thing, and this is tied to the initial bit about mastering the communication art, is on personal branding, where we are saying, as a leader, of course, you must then be keen on commanding presence, so that if you walk into a room, every other person has that need to listen to you, or that impetus to listen to you. The other thing is on consistency in values and decisions, so that people know what you stand for. I mean, if James is known for keeping time in terms of meeting, really, then that should be who you are known for. So that it is not a case of today, my meeting starts at 8:30, or I set a meeting at 8:30 and I come in at 9, and then tomorrow I set a meeting at 8:30 and I'm coming in at 7:45, for instance. There needs to be that consistency around the values you hold, so that it is known that if James calls for a meeting at 8:30, it's actually going to start at 8:30. This will always be a personal branding perspective that will also always set you apart from other group of people. The other thing is on reputational bit, where you need to be cognizant of the fact that your reputation extends beyond just your company. I've had scenarios where I'm walking in a mall with my daughter, and somebody randomly says, "Oh, James, I saw your interview on TV the other day, or I saw you speaking at an event the other day." And so you're always left wondering if this person then found me drunk and potentially falling on these corridors. You can imagine the perspective or perception that they would walk away with moving forward. So also, if you are keen on them occupying that corner office, then also be consistent around the reputation that you hold, and the culture that, or rather, the perspective that you'd want to share with people out there beyond the organization. The other bit is on resilience and adaptability. I had mentioned this in terms of political acumen. You will not be the most popular person in most scenarios, so develop a thick skin for criticism. Of course, not necessarily ignoring such criticism and not allowing them to, I usually say, detach your emotions from work. Because the reality then is, if you are to be not in any way being stoic, but if you are to be influenced by every other comment or criticism that will come your way, then you'd only be able to make such progress. So allow for criticism, but then don't allow it to be to influence you emotionally and impede your judgment in terms of decision. And of course, this would also require a bit of resilience in the face of either failure or crisis, because your team will always be looking up to you in the event of a failure or a crisis. Own up to the failure. In the crisis, remain calm and allow for adaptability. while everyone else would be looking at what went wrong, be this unique person who says, what would we have done right, or what can we do right in the midst of a crisis? Adaptability in the fast changing business is also something that you must embrace. I think I've spoken to a bit about the changing work culture and work ecosystem. We are now seeing a lot more on focus on deliverables as opposed to presence, flexibility around remote working and the likes. The regulatory landscape. Uh, right now, we see a lot of judicial precedents being set, whether it is in the context of human resources policies, geopolitical environments also influencing this. So this requires a lot of adaptability, and that then allows you that uniqueness to be this one person who will always be grounded and be looked up to when there is need for those difficult decision-making moments. The other thing is on leading with calm and clarity during uncertainty. I think this is me belaboring the point. The best approach I've always used is then saying what's the worst that could have happened, especially in uncertain times, and then try and work backwards. See, then how can you then be able to influence it to avoid the worst that could possibly happen? So, in a nutshell, resilience and adaptability as a leader. So thank you very much. I think will be all from my end. The session was supposed to be only for 1 hour, and so I'll allow for Q&A. But before that, I think a point that came in during a bit of a discussion with myself and Esther just prior to this session is on me speaking to potentially the challenges that I've had to face in a journey to where I am at right now. And I think I can speak to a few, which I just jotted down as we are logging into this meeting. And the first one is, of course, the bit about leadership versus age credibility, or rather, age versus leadership credibility. Of course, I'm not that young, but from face value and what we are used to as the millennials and the not yet. So more often than not, that has featured in some scenarios where you walk into a meeting and everyone is trying to look for James, CEO of Cape. You, the, um, you,
Jay. Hey, Jay.
Hello.
He dropped off, right?
Yes, he dropped off.
Okay, let's give him a few minutes then. Thank you. But in the meantime, we could prepare some questions. We can.
my apologies. I think.
Okay, no worries.
Yes.
No worries, James.
Yeah, so I think I was just in the tail end. I was saying the other bit would be on the limited resources versus the expectations that will be set by the organization. The other thing is on resistance to change. Lastly, it will be on balancing the technical background versus leadership. So remember, for every other person, this technical individual you're looking at James as initially more of an urban planner and now required to then be a leader with strategic vision and focus on governance, for instance. So finding that balance can also be a bit of a challenge, but I think we learn as we go. I don't have the monopoly of knowledge, and the reality then is that you build on yourself as the days go by. So thank you very much. I think that will be just a brief overview of my journey in terms of the career growth. So I'll then hand it over to Esther.
Thank you, James. That was amazing. And apologies for the initial bit. I think we are back on track. Jay, I know we are co-hosting this with you, but I've listened to you, James, and congratulations, you know. There's a reason why I wanted you to kick off this, because I know people, as you said, leadership and age. There are people who just say, no, this one can't be a CEO. When did he get this seasoned? But I'm proud of you, and I need to say that. I'm very proud of you, James, and the good job that you're doing.
Thank you.
I want to maybe open the floor for questions, but as the rest of the people ask questions, I know there are HR professionals in the room, and I'm thinking loudly about organizational culture. I've listened to you, and I can tell you, you have people at the center of your heart. What is the role of a CEO, or how would an HR professional maneuver, number one, up to the CEO position? Because definitely we deal with the people, that's the biggest asset in any organization. But then again, touching on organizational culture, this is a ball that has been tossed here and there to belong to the CEO, to belong to HR. And we say it belongs to HR when it's not working, and it belongs to the CEO when it's working. I know Jay and the rest would be clapping at the back. But talk about the CEO leading in the systems, compliance, the structure, because the organizational structure definitely speaks about the culture of an organization. If I just look at the structure, I can tell you this one might be difficult to move up to that position of a CEO. Some of them are very rigid, you know, the pockets of power where decisions are made, and the stories that people tell. So speak to us about those two things as the rest of the people also come in with their questions. Good.
Okay, that's a fairly dicey question, and at the risk of trying to be politically correct, I've either been lucky enough or unlucky enough not to work in an organization that have I have an in-house HR. So both as the CEO of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and at KEPRO, all our HR functions have ordinarily been outsourced. So I'd say that sometimes I tend to double up as the HR, only until that time when it is not working, as you rightly put it. But quick pointers, then I think, and this is also tied to your second question around how then can the HRs pivot to CEO role. I think fundamentally, the first bit would be then for you as an individual, as a HR or as the aspiring CEO, to set or rather be the cultural architect. So if it is about timing, then are you this one HR or one CEO who says people should report at 8, but you're coming in at 10:30, for instance? And so, because really I've always believed that culture is not defined by policy, but more by the daily actions and behaviors, as well as the values that are then embodied by the leaders of the organization. And that is, of course, tied to then who is the definer of the core values and purpose of the organization. The other thing quickly on top of my mind would be on you at an individual level, whether as the HR or the CEO, being the one walking the talk, so that you're not just being this leader who says, because the reality is then nobody listens to what is said, they listen to what is done. So they will only, the rest of the staff would only be able to adopt what the leader is doing. If a leader then institutes a culture where we are saying, our meeting starts at 10 a.m. If the leader is seated by 10 a.m., then I think only a mad person would be walking in at 10 or 5 a.m. To join the meeting. So those small actions would then be able to uniquely place you in this position of being able to influence and define the culture of the organization. Lastly, and I think this is more of a HR. I'm not necessarily a technical matter expert, but what has worked for me has always been trying to build people-centered systems so that if we are developing a HR system, policy, for instance, it is not about management sitting down and drafting document and submitting it for approval by the board. It is something that has then been fed into by the rest of the team so that there is that ownership of the document. So I don't know whether that sort of answers your question, but I think top of my mind, those are a few of the pointers that I would want to share.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, that does. And Jay, maybe as Jay unmutes to ask a question or make a comment, talk to us about stress management for CEOs.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be candid. I have seen CEOs that, and I know you talked about emotional intelligence. I'm not being personal, but I've seen some that have really not been able to handle their stress, and it ends up spilling or just getting down to the teams. Talk to us about it. I don't want to. Yes.
Okay, I wish you were not recording this part, but I'll admit that I've been a victim, and I think I've given a disclaimer that emotional intelligence is not something that is some sort of a playbook that you then just adopt and is inherently, or a software that you just key in, install, and you're now pre-programmed to be an emotionally intelligent individual. But I think what has worked for me, and this is something I got from a mentor last year, when I think I was also sort of struggling with my team. We were in a fairly difficult environment that then sort of manifested as stress, and this stress was sort of then being transferred to the rest of the team. As a disclaimer, these stresses usually both external and internal. And so the statement or something that I've always worked with in the last few years then is detach your emotions from the work environment. I usually say work takes a very substantial bit of our lives, but then really, are we over glorifying work of being an individual, or a human being for that matter? There's a statement that I usually refer to, that we work so hard to live that we forget to live. So that you are keen on being this perfect person and not open to the reality that you're human. So first, detach your emotions from work. Things will always go wrong, things will always go right. So breathe in, breathe out. Now, when you're talking about stress management, I think really breaks, and as basic as it may sound, I've always seen that taking that break sort of helps. If you feel then that the pressure is maybe coming from the board or even internally within the organization, allow yourself that grace to take a break, then decompress. And I'm sure once you're able to then come back to the organization, you'd settle in and avoid those antagonistic behaviors that would then be manifesting as stress or lack of emotional intelligence.
Good. Jay, and anyone else with a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you so much, James, for the presentation. Now, I'm also a CEO, and I believe that I'm upcoming and learning from CEOs like you. And as a CEO, there are some challenges that I'm sure that you have faced. How did you overcome those challenges?
Okay, thank you. And unfortunately, towards the tail end, I think I mentioned a few of the challenges I'd mentioned. One of them, as I'd mentioned, was on the age versus leadership credibility bit, where ordinarily, and I remember even interviewing for the role at KEPRO, and the shortlisters were almost forced to include me in the list. And what has often then worked for me is really being so good at my job that then you cannot wish me away. I think there's usually this famous quote that they say, opportunity or rather luck is opportunity meeting preparedness. So while somebody else would assume that James is lucky, it then goes into a lot of work to be able to ground yourself as a researcher and a policy or advocacy expert to be this unique person that has unique offerings to the organization that any other rational person would be really at pains to explain why they would want to ignore you. So just be so damn good at what you do and let your work speak for itself. In terms of the bit about resistance to change, and this one I won't necessarily reference any particular organization, but for potentially those who know me, there was an organization, and if you look at my profile, I was there for quite a short while. And here the biggest challenge was the CEO role had been reduced to more of an executor role, where you're told turn left, you're turning left. You're told turn right, you're turning right, without really any grounding mechanism for the team to then know what to do in the absence of the board chair, for instance. And so I came in and me being this naive and quote unquote professional person was not open to this idea. And I kept on questioning, why should I do this? Why should I do this? And so that, of course, put me at loggerheads with a few of the board directors and individuals. But I think, as I mentioned, if you're grounded in certain values, then either the universe has a way of conspiring in your advantage to allow you an opportunity to exit, or in most scenarios, in the context of us being very knowledgeable around HR laws and rights, then even as they're frustrating you, it gets to a point where they either see logic in whatever you're trying to communicate to them or implement, or then they get to a point where they have no choice. If you're stubborn enough, they will then proceed and implement. Of course, as long as you're within the appropriate or acceptable regulatory confines from an employment and labor relations point of view. The other thing in terms of balancing being a technical person and leadership, I think this is also tied to the first question or comment that I made where I said, be so good at what you do. So ordinarily I'm expected to be this vision bearer for the organization. And so that would require a lot of reading and research. But then it's all about the context within which you're operating at. There are those contexts that would then require the technical side of me, and there are those contexts that would then require me to be a leader. So when you're talking about leadership, are we setting or rather allowing for clear communication in terms of deliverables amongst our team members and the likes? Are we empathetic enough as a leader? Are you open to change? Are you adaptive and the likes? So those are some of the challenges and how I've been able to counter them in a nutshell. I think I see a few questions on the chat. I don't know whether I proceed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please do.
Okay. So of course I see someone is asking, as a HR, how can one handle a situation where the CEO is either stubborn and everything wants done, they want everything done in their way, or whether it is practical or whether it's actually impractical or outside compliance mandates, and especially if they're shouting at you or insulting you. Quite unfortunate, to be honest, that in this time and then someone is open to shouting and insulting you. My response to the shouting and insulting, I think, I don't know the nature of the organization, and if you could, it's something that you could then raise with higher quotas. I think for typical organizations, you then have an arrangement that would allow you to either communicate with the board of directors or something if the CEO or MD is the final decision maker within the day-to-day operational bit. So that's quite unfortunate. But in terms of operational bit, Esther, I don't know if you'd want to allow for Owen to just explain whether this is a personal business or this is actually a proper organization with proper governance structure.
Yes, Owen, go ahead.
Hi, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, this is something that personally I've gone through way back, and it mostly happens, I wouldn't say in very big organizations, but mostly in small entities where the MD is also mostly the owner of the business. And most of them are mostly like family businesses. And when you also look at it, mostly it's in the hospitality space. So it's something that I know people are going through. So I would just like people to understand, like, how should they handle such situations? Because you see, you can't tell someone to quit and they don't have any other opportunity or they don't have any other plan. So how would someone handle such situations?
Okay, I think, Owen, you've sort of rightly alluded to an answer I was going to give, that maybe the easiest way would be quitting. But as you rightly put it, we are in situations, or rather, some people are in situations where getting another job may not necessarily be in the offing or an immediate option. So, yeah, quite a challenging ecosystem to work within. I think for me, I then advise that do only so much that is required of you and really detach your emotions from that job. It is an unfortunate reality that you have to live with, but I think your well-being matters compared to that job. So if quitting is then not an option, then really be so emotionally grounded that such insults and comments do not get to you as a persona from an emotional point of view. And of course, this is not in any way an acceptable arrangement or a permanent solution when you're talking about detaching emotions from that job. But this is not in any way a professional advice. All I would say then is, in the interim, do your 8 to 5, put in place what is required as far as your deliverables are concerned. If really, and more of an advice also, more often than not, your perception, the people's, a third party's perception of you is really not about yourself. It's about them. So, and this is me potentially being vulnerable enough. I remember when I was at this organization, and the board chair would then put you in a place where you would question your own capacity or existence as a person. But I think what then saved me is detaching my emotions from that job while I was, of course, looking at other options in terms of exiting the organization. And I was able to do that for, I think, a period of up to 4 months. You know, these are organizations that you get in within the first month, and you're like, yep, I made the wrong decision in terms of career change. I am, of course, on my way out. So that bit about emotional detachment has sort of helped me. Go and read the principles of Stoicism. I think that would sort of save you in such an arrangement in the interim before you get an exit plan.
Yeah, I like that, James, because to be honest, I have worked in organizations where, of course, as the head at the top of HR, you deal with the CEO, and I think stress management is very key for leadership and emotional intelligence. Very key, you know. I am one bold person, which may not be the case with many others.
Sure.
And I'll personally have a sit-in with the boss and say, excuse me, James, I think this doesn't look nice on you.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not on the others, because 10, 15 people can be wrong. So I think it's very important that leadership are able to get a hold of the emotions.
Yeah,
Of
course, Esther, in his defense, or in the defense of the people he's referring to, it is unfortunately a family-owned business, so they have no other recourse in terms of escalating the issue. And that's what I was saying. Maybe in the interim, if you can't, then because and maybe if Owen can come back in, these are organizations then that if you try to speak up, you are either fired or something.
Which is true, and I've been in such organizations, and unfortunately, they are not all family-owned businesses. There are others, because others that are huge, but because the CEO makes the final decision, and you have no access to the board, then that now becomes very difficult for people to speak up. So I think leadership, it's a leadership issue,
Sure.
and the board, I always advise that the board makes their way down once in a while. I know it may not be very easy, but it's also good for them to interact with the people and get to understand what happens, because when the ceiling is with the CEO, then the people are bound to suffer if that CEO then is not able to handle stress, or is not doesn't have the people skills.
Okay. But maybe Esther, this would also be, and I know that we are short of time, but this would also be a challenge to ourselves and maybe to the HR then. How then do you find a balance? Because unfortunately, we are almost getting into a culture of normalizing bad behavior and using, in this case, there have been quite famous words, toxic bosses. I can't remember, I can't put a word to the other name. And I might sound insensitive, but then how do we find a balance where an individual is potentially not performing, but they're always very quick to then cite depression or toxic work environments as excuses. And that when you then go into the disciplinary, or if the CEO then decides to be objective, you will then come to the realization that, oh, Esther is not actually delivering.
I think
Yes.
it's there are systems in place, when this proper performance management systems, it's not an emotional decision. It's not emotional, as
Sure.
you say, detach emotions. Because of course, at any point, even for a CEO, when an organization decides to lay you off, there must be some good reasons,
Sure.
and it's a process. It's a process that you signed up for something. There are measurable KPIs, and there's a follow-up of your performance. So if the systems are working, then I think by the time we decide that we can't go on with you, I think the processes must have been followed. But I know there are instances now when it's purely lack of emotional intelligence. Because at the top, as you get to the top, there are decisions that you need to possibly hold before you make. There are comments that you need to be very careful when you make, because if you make them as a CEO, they are what people will call Bible truths.
Sure.
A statement made by a CEO doesn't carry the same weight when it's made by a subordinate staff. If the CEO or HR just says this business is crashing or financially we are unstable, that's a very strong statement. Very strong. If somebody at the bottom makes it, it's a joke. So I think any word I've seen CEOs who have insults completely on the people, and because you can do nothing, as I think, they get away with it. I see when say, do you agree that growing up or going up the ladder, one has to play politics?
Really, Owen is trying to put me on the spot today. It's a yes and a no. In typical organizations that have proper structures, then you have no business playing politics. I'll tell you, for instance, in the organization I work in right now, you're dealing with people running multi-billion-dollar businesses. You look at your budget against their budget, and you realize that they have zero time to play politics or be emotional about some of these conversations. So in this case, then really, because there are systems and structures to guide you on what is expected of you as an individual or as a CEO, then you have really no business to be political in any way. But then there are organizations then that either those structures would be overshadowed by the politics, and I will then encourage you to play cautious office politics that would be grounded on truth and facts, where you are delivering on your mandate. And the best way to play around it is usually document all facts, document every other thing that you are doing, to ensure that even as you're playing politics, the truth, quote unquote, will always be on your side. So that it is not, oh, I told Esther to do this, she did not do it. And Esther is saying, oh, no, you didn't tell me. So there is that verbal exchange that then turns into a political office politics of sorts. But as long as then there is no documented trail, it will then be watered down into an office politics that might end up now sort of consuming you at an individual level.
Anyone else with a question or a comment? Seems no one else, but maybe as we close, James,
Yes.
you talked about owning up to the failures. To what magnitude should a CEO own up?
I mean, to repeat that to the last bit,
Yeah.
I mean, if you, and this is a powerful. I think it was a TED talk or something, and somebody asked, how then do you reclaim your powers as a CEO? And the reality, or one of the biggest takeaways from that podcast or TED talk, was never blame anyone. On your shit to the last bit, so that it is not about Esther, you did not do this. It is about Esther, how could I have better supported you as the CEO of the organization to deliver this? That will always then avoid the back and forth of, oh, you did not tell me this, or I did not know this, or something of the sort. I think starting from a first person perspective of saying, or grounding yourself around the problem or crisis and saying, how could I have helped, or how could I have ensured that this doesn't occur, would allow for an open session or open feedback loop, so that even that person who is supposed to be the one who really led to this failure, at the end of the day, they might end up owning up to that reality of, I'm actually the one who messed up, as opposed to, oh, Esther, you made this mistake. Naturally, as a human being, the first response would always be to defend yourself or deflect the question. Yeah.
Good. I see someone guide on going up the ladder with reciprocated position and pay, with a CEO or director not making you feel like they helped you get the experience and skills.
Okay. I mean, this is also, I mean, a very interesting question. I don't have an exact answer, because the reality is that organizations will always be different. As a CEO of KPRO, before getting into that organization, I was earning a certain amount of money. And of course, I have to be cognizant of the fact that business member organizations, there's a certain pay range that is allowable for a CEO, for instance, and depending on the size of the organization. 3 years down the line, my salary has, of course, increased based off on a number of factors. Of course, in addition to the changing tax regime, there's also the bit about the organization growing, revenue coming in. So it's all dependent on the performance and the sector or industry within which that organization falls into. When you're talking about whether the CEO or director not making you feel like they helped you, this is still the politics bit. I mean, if at a personal level, then this is an individual effort in terms of going up and above what would ordinarily be required of you, then you have no business being emotionally attached to someone's comment or perception of how you got to a certain level. So really, back to the basics. Be so good at what you do so that people's comments or perceptions of you do not in any way emotionally affect you past 5 p.m.
And
I know sometimes I'm being reckless with my statements. Fortunately, here I am speaking on my behalf as James and not as the CEO of KPRO.
I like that. Now, as
Thank you.
it seems there's no other question, but I want you to tell us, what is the biggest and the most important KPI for a CEO?
Okay, that's a very tough one. But I think it's what I've always worked with as, and at least me, this is me quickly skimming through my typical KPIs, is just trying to find that balance between people and profit, so that because ordinarily at the end of the year when you're reporting your performance, the first thing will be how are we performing financially. For any CEO, you have to then maintain a fairly good equity ratio in terms of your financial performance. Because if it is on the negative, then that is when questions would start coming as to why was this budget or rather expenditure going above the approved budget and the like. So profit is on one hand, and of course it's then closely tied to the people bit, because at least from my personal experience, any other time an employee exits an organization, it usually paints, or rather, there is a way the board then looks at you as the manager of the organization. And so team retention, work culture, team motivation, and the likes also tend to reflect on you as far as the performance of the CEO is concerned. So I think just finding that balance between people and profits is a major KPI. Yeah.
I like that. I can tell you, I was waiting. You know, I'm an HR person. It would have been a difficult conversation after this if people did not feature in your answer.
I can imagine. Yeah.
You can imagine that. You're on leave,
Yes.
James.
Yes, I am on leave.
So
yes.
You're on leave. So who is sitting in for you?
Okay.
Yes.
As a
It's
disclaimer,
a work-life balance I'm asking
as a
about.
CEO, you are never on leave. It's that then it's you to then prioritize and choose what you're going to respond to, and those that you will ignore. But you're never permanently on leave where you can switch off your phone and go to some remote island.
So the people on the call, Owen, Jay, and the rest, you had that right. And I know there's the others with Jay who are not on the call. Becky, we have Faith. So that the CEO is never on leave fully. So if you're pursuing that position, be well advised. Thank you very much. Thank you, James. Thank you for taking your time. Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
I think I know Jay and the rest of the people on the call identify closely with you because I see a young. It says we can all do it. Asante sana. Thank you for
Thank you,
your
Esther,
time.
also for creating the platform and granting me the opportunity to be able to speak to you.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
too.
you very much.
Good night. God bless you,
Okay.
everyone. Bye bye.
Okay.